now on BBC iPlayer.
Well, you could go to bed and complain about how hot it is, or stay up with the window open watching BBC One. Here's Adam.
We've got so much to talk about on tonight's podcast. We are joined by a former doctor to talk about antibody testing, a former head of MI6 to talk about the delay to the establishment of the Intelligence and Security Committee in Parliament.
What?
Just kidding. We've got David Tennant, who used to be Doctor Who, and Judi Dench, who played M in James Bond. They're going to talk to us about the theatre. Hello, guys. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. That's even better, isn't it? That is better than having a real former head of MI5.
Well, if you want to talk about antibody testing, or Dame Judi, if you want to put your hat in the ring for the Intelligence Committee in Parliament, you're very welcome. And of course, we'll have all the day's news as well in this edition of the Coronavirus Newscast.
The Coronavirus Newscast from the BBC.
Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
And Laura in the same studio, 2 metres apart.
And Chris in my usual little box of wittering.
So there I was this morning reading on the Independent website an interview with the actress Maxine Peake, where she said quite a lot of controversial things. And there was one line in particular about the American police, George Floyd, and the American police being trained by the Israeli secret services.
Yes, which is obviously a controversial thing to say. Exactly what she said was, the tactics used by the police in America kneeling on George Floyd's neck, that was learnt from seminars with the Israeli secret services. Now, what then happened was that this article was retweeted, shared online by Rebecca Long-Bailey, of course, the shadow education secretary in the Labour Party, former definite, member of the Corbyn project, but somebody who had been kept on by Keir Starmer, the new Labour leader.
Well, the sharing of that article was wrong, and because the article contained anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and I have therefore stood Rebecca Long-Bailey down from the shadow cabinet. I've made it my first priority to tackle anti-Semitism, and rebuilding trust with the Jewish community is a number one priority for me.
Now, why does sharing a link from an article from an interview with a famous actress turn into being defenestrated and being chucked out of your job politically? Is because Keir Starmer said during the Labour leadership campaign, getting rid of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party was his number one priority. He believed that it was the right thing to get Rebecca Long-Bailey out if she refused to delete the tweet, which she did. And his backers tonight are, I have to say, a lot of them are very, very pleased. They say this shows his actions actually match up to his words, and it's something that was so toxic for Jeremy Corbyn under the Labour Party and caused such trouble and such agony inside the Labour Party and among many voters, of course, in Jewish groups, that him moving swiftly was absolutely the right thing to do. But the risk is, isn't it, and we're already seeing it tonight, is that it reopens some of those really bitter tensions inside the Labour Party that have been kind of quite under the surface, really, rather than all over the newspapers.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Laura. By the way, I thought that being stood down is a very polite way of saying fired or sacked, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a euphemism. Yeah, I just wonder that, because it has reopened, hasn't it? That division that's been there and stark for years and years and years, or the last 5 years within the Labour Party, it's kind of reopened that now. And yes, Sir Keir Starmer had made this big pitch about eradicating anti-Semitism being his number one priority. But I wonder if in the context of where we are with all the news about the coronavirus and all the rest of it, and this was retweeting a link that was an article written by somebody else, and that particular line, as highly controversial as it was well down the article, whether he could have, if he'd wanted to keep her, got away with not sacking her.
Oh, I think so. I think it was a deliberate decision. I mean, there was a clarification. There was a discussion between her team and his team. They asked her to make a clarification. She did that. And she said she didn't mean to cause any offence and all of those kinds of things. But they asked her to remove the original message. She refused to do that, and that was enough. And I think that, the reality is that this has been such a toxic issue that Keir Starmer has really wanted to move on from, and maybe in a way it was an opportunity to make that decisive break. But it's not that straightforward, because during the leadership campaign he was so careful not to offend any of the Corbynistas, so careful to say things about bringing the party together, wanting to move on from factionalism, absolutely. And this has kind of blown that apart in a way. That said, I also think his team's pretty confident that it's a minority of people who will be upset about this,
Yeah. Now, so Rebecca Long-Bailey is going to be spending less time with Keir Starmer, but you've been spending more time with him in glamorous Stevenage
Well,
today.
yeah, all this happened on a day when Keir Starmer was trying to make a big pitch to the public about his concerns for the economy. And we had a very hot, sunny, lovely day in Stevenage. We're actually at the council. We met some people who love the podcast. So hello, if you're watching or listening tonight.
Hello, Stevenage.
Thank you very much for being so hospitable and giving tea and biscuits and even maybe perhaps a chocolate ice cream in the middle of the afternoon. But he was there to try to put pressure on the government over how they're going to prevent mass unemployment after the coronavirus crisis. We've talked about it so much, haven't we? How the economy being put in the deep freeze during the lockdown is going to have a really significant impact. And he warned that we might be in for kind of numbers of people on the dole that we haven't seen for a really long time.
I'm concerned that we've been living through a health crisis, but we are also facing a huge economic crisis. And in a sense, we've been shielded from it. But I really fear that, unemployment on a scale we haven't seen for a generation could happen, and we need to take steps to prevent that.
I mean, Keir Starmer doesn't have the power to save the economy, but he's still got some ideas for how he would do it, hasn't he?
Yeah, he does. And he talked about extending the furlough scheme for some sectors. That's basically where the taxpayers been paying millions of people's wages, but the Treasury wants to phase it out before too long. He also talked about a return of something called the Future Jobs Fund, which happened in the last crisis, but in the end it only created about 100,000 jobs. But Chris, this is really going to be the dominant theme for the next few weeks before Westminster packs up for the summer, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got Rishi Sunak, haven't we, doing his thing, a kind of summer budget thing coming up in a couple of weeks, and Boris Johnson doing something tail end of next week, I think. Is that right?
Oh, I think it might be Tuesday, actually.
Earlier in the week.
We will see.
And then, as you say, this kind of running theme that we're going to have, I mean, for months, maybe for years, I guess for years, about the economy and where we are with it, as so many people are just the realities of what the virus has done. And then there's the kind of political challenge, isn't there, for Keir Starmer, about this thing about constructive opposition that he was talking about. I mean, the striking thing, as you were saying on the news earlier, that this is the first time he's been able to go out and do a kind of traditional grip and grin, except you can't grip and you can't shake the hand and all the rest of it at the moment, of meeting people and doing that thing that political leaders normally do all of the time. But then how you calibrate being an opposition leader at a time like this, when an election's a long way off, when your party's just been trounced, fourth election defeat in a row and all of that, whilst trying to carve out some turf in the hope from his perspective that they can be competitive come an election in whenever it comes.
Keir Starmer, on a lighter note, did tell me he's already got his haircut booked in for Saturday the 4th.
Well, I mean, he needs one.
Before he goes for a pint at his local. So he's on it. He said he was looking forward to a haircut. I said, have you got it booked in? He said, oh, yeah.
I booked in one for the 5th of July today.
Did you?
Right, so that's with some troubles on the front bench in Labour, some sort of troubles for the front bench for the government. Robert Jenrick, the community secretary, today was talking about how they're going to help pubs set up more tables out on the pavement and bust the planning system, so that makes it easier for them to try and recover some of their losses from the lockdown. But the planning system in other ways has proved a bit tricky for him.
Yeah, it might not have been a great day for Robert Jenrick to be talking about the planning system, because the row over the planning decision that he made to allow Richard Desmond, property tycoon, former newspaper magnate and Tory donor, to build lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of swanky flats in East London. The row from that will not go away. There were, Chris, weren't there some sort of jaw-clenchingly, well, I'll just say that, jaw-clenching rather than another part of the anatomy clenching texts between him and Richard Desmond that came out into the public last night. And Labour's convinced that it really, 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 really looks pretty stinky.
Although those texts, I mean, they are just sort of friendly texts rather than super chummy texts. And he does say, Robert Jenrick, to Richard Desmond, this is a proper official process. I can't really be in touch with you while we're doing this, and I'll take the advice of my officials, etc.
The thing is, though, it's a golden rule, isn't it, in life as in politics, that if your texts are printed out and published, it's going to be orcs. There's going to be clenching going on north and south, I think, anatomically. And so, as you say, though, I mean, yes, at one point he did say, didn't he, Mr. Jenrick, I mustn't go any further. He didn't go ahead with the proposed site visit to this patch in Tower Hamlets where this proposed set of new swanky apartments were going to be built. And of course, actually, because of what happened, he did then admit, didn't he, that it looked bad, that there was an apparent bias, and therefore the whole thing was quashed. And so actually, there's no building work going on. And curiously, Laura, Labour are not calling for Robert Jenrick to resign. And normally, often in these things, the opposition say, oh, he's got to go, they've got to go. And they haven't done that.
If our texts ever get published as part of an inquiry, you'll see one that says, from Chris to Laura, saying, Laura, I think your tea's arrived.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
On page 196 of our text being printed out. Hopefully you never have to see that. Now, if you go down to the beach today, you will find lots of other people have gone to the beach as well. Have a listen to the scene down in Bournemouth today.
I don't know what's happening that so many people think it's acceptable to come down here and use our beaches when we've got a national emergency going on. It's a national emergency and not a national holiday.
We've got to have a couple of drinks, enjoying the sun. Yeah, it's the closest we're going to get to a holiday this year, isn't it?
It's not good though, is it? It's probably going to cause a second wave, isn't it? Everyone's just doing what they want, isn't they?
Major incident in Bournemouth, the sun comes out.
Yes, and the person who's got to clean it up, well, I don't know if maybe she is actually cleaning it up. I was thinking about metaphorically, is the leader of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council, who's Vicky Slade. Hello, Vicky.
Hello there. I have been known to get out there with my litter picker on a number of occasions.
Is tonight one of the nights that you'll go out and do some litter picking?
I may not be out tonight, but I could well be there tomorrow morning as the beach cleanup starts. They start at first light, so maybe I'll get up early and help.
Vicky, I just wonder, in practical terms, I know that you guys have talked about this major incident in Bournemouth, but what can you actually do when shed loads of people, independent of each other, jump in the car and head to the beach?
The reason we've declared a major incident is because we need to work with other partners, because we just can't deal with this on our own. We need to use everybody's powers together. It's the behaviour, unbelievable behaviour that we've seen. You know, people urinating in someone's garden, but not once, like, you know, in every street. It's appalling. We've witnessed people using local green areas as toilets when there is an open toilet right next to them. They just don't seem to care. It's as if people have lost their mind.
How's that any different in terms of the incidence of antisocial behaviour? How's that any different from a normal summer versus the obvious concern at the moment about social distancing? And again, I come back to that thought about what you can actually do about that.
So clearly there's a big problem for us because we've had low numbers of cases in this area, and clearly you can't do track and trace or test and trace or whatever they want to call it. You can't do that when there's 200,000 people on the beach with you and you have no idea who they are, and everybody's like together. So that is a real problem. What's really different is that the way that we're having to deal with this behaviour is putting all of the services under massive pressure. And you know, at the same time as people have got no patience at the moment. People are fed up with the whole situation. And we're just seeing a real breakdown in the way society's behaving.
Would it be legally possible to shut the beach?
We're not sure it's legally possible to shut the beach because of the nature of the type of beach it is. I know other places have had sort of, you know, bookings, you know, when they've been private land. It's public land. I don't know that that's physically possible. We've been trying to sort of shut roads down to specific car parks to ease the pressure, but shutting the beach itself will be really difficult. We tried a month ago to persuade our MPs to get the Prime Minister to bring in travel distance limits, because we knew a month ago that everyone would descend because we're less than 2 hours away. And why wouldn't you want to come to Bournemouth or Poole or Christchurch? But, you know, the MPs wouldn't go with it, and the Prime Minister, well, look, he's just, you know, he's lifted it even more, hasn't he?
Well, this is really interesting, Vicky. You sound, really furious, but also really worried on behalf of your community. I wondered if you picked up this week that actually a Labour MP, Peter Kyle, from down on the south coast, further along the coast from you, asked the Prime Minister about this week, and he said he hoped that communities that were tourist hotspots had some guts, I think was his phrase. I mean, what will happen, do you think, next weekend? Because then everything opens, you know, so the pubs will open, the cafes, restaurants will open, people will want to make money, they'll want to get people in. Do you think that this will be solved when that piece of normality starts to come back? Or are you more concerned that the sort of politicians up in Westminster have just given people carte blanche to do what they like?
There is a good chance that next week we are going to be able to see some of those people that have been on the beach actually maybe in their own locations in the pubs, spreading that around a little bit more. That's sort of my saving grace. Our tourism business really needs tourists, but not yet, because we're not ready.
If you'd like other people to go to other places in the vicinity, where would you recommend as a nice, less famous spot in the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole area? For example, have you got a model village? I like a model village myself.
Do you like a model village? There's a nice model village in Wimborne. I could recommend Wimborne, but it's not on the sea.
Okay.
I'll gladly tell you where the locals go, but I'm not doing that on BBC.
Oh, really? There's like some secret garden somewhere. Vicky Slade, thank you very much, and good luck with the cleaning up.
Thanks.
Now, I've mentioned it a few times this week that people who work in the theatre industry are just incredibly stressed out at the moment because they've been closed for ages, no revenue, and it's a business that needs lots of people to be in the same place at the same time. And theatres are included in the unlocking in England, but in the sense that you're allowed to go in and work in a theatre and maybe do a rehearsal, but not have any audience members there.
That's right. And it's not just a huge industry in London. Of course, the West End comes alive, packs people in. But in lots and lots and lots of parts of the country, the local theatre is a hugely important part of the economy. It gets people into town in the evening. Of course, they, go off and spend money in other places. And it's a really, really big part of the economy. And of course, our cultural life as well. And nobody quite knows if and when it will be able to get back and running. Well, we understand that Oliver Dowden, the Culture Secretary, is poised to unveil a 5-point plan. There's always a number and a number of points. And apparently we're up to point 2 now, which is that you could have rehearsals. And point 3, which he hasn't put a date on, is going to be outdoor theatre can go ahead, and maybe some indoor theatre, but with the audience quite far back. So the first few rows out of action, but we don't know when that will happen. Anyway, let's talk about all of this stuff with, and I can't believe I'm about to say this, Dame Judi Dench and David Tennant. Hello, both.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome to the podcast. Now, you two have actually done a bit of lockdown acting together, haven't you, on stage, which you can watch on iPlayer.
Very true, yes.
Well, David did a lot of it. David wrote it and was in it and told us what to do.
I didn't quite write it, but you came and stole the show in the final episode, Judy, as you do.
We had a very nice time.
Let's watch you in action, and then you can give us some advice.
Sorry.
Stop bleating, please.
Sorry. Hello.
I'll be with you in a second.
Joe says flowers, ?
Yes, that's fine. That's fine. Oh, I hate this bloody machine. Why can't we go back to cups and strings? I'm asking you, why can't we go back to cups and strings?
Yes, whatever you want.
David?
Sorry, I didn't realise you were joining us.
Well, it would have somehow lessened the impact, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
You've grown your hair.
Extensions, actually.
Oh. Michael?
Judy.
Are those extensions too?
No, this is all me.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Dame Judi, I was thinking it might have been an acting challenge, but that just seems very natural.
No, it wasn't. It was very, very challenging. Because what is so curious about this kind of system is that, on stage, people, you might get one actor who's speaking to you, who's looking at you, but the others really aren't. But when you do something like this, everybody's looking at you. So you feel it's very onerous. You suddenly think, oh my God, it's my turn. And it may not be at all. So it's not like anything I've ever done before.
Can I ask, before we talk about the very serious business of what's going to happen in the theatre now, did anyone, Dame Judi, ever have the courage during that process to mute you?
To mute? What does that mean, mute you?
Turn you off, switch you off, turn the volume down.
I expect all over the world. Oh, mute you. Oh, yes. I think they've rarely heard my voice. I expect I'm muted all the time.
David, lots of other sectors have got dates or at least the sense of when they might be back, even if they're not coming back in England in sort of 10 days' time. But for the theatre, it just looks so bleak.
It does. Well, of course, the theatre is a very particular thing, isn't it? It needs a room full of hundreds of people to work. So there isn't really an obvious way currently for it to come back. The theatre's closed in the middle of March, and that's it. They're gone. There is no revenue. It's interesting what you were just saying about, because I heard that on the 4th of July they will reopen, but not for performances, which doesn't seem to make any apparent sense. I don't quite know what you would do there. You need to have a full house. Theatres operate usually on relatively small profit margins, so they are not going to work if you have to block off every fourth seat or whatever the solution might be. So we need to find a way of bridging that gap so that the theatres can not avoid collapsing in the meantime.
So if the government does unveil this 5-point plan, as they're probably going to do in the next few hours, and the next stage is some outdoor performances and some very small performances with a very small audience, you just think that doesn't cut it? That's basically no good.
Look, we'll take what we can get. I mean, everyone understands the safety of the audiences has to be paramount. No theatre wants to, invite people in only for people to get sick. I think that there has to be a solution where we get some sort of help, and that has to be on a government level to keep these theatres going until they're able to reopen properly.
Dame Judy, I get, as we heard there from David, there's that fear of regional theatre perhaps collapsing and never coming back, and then I guess losing the pipeline of the next generation of actors who cut their teeth there and might just decide to do something else.
Quite. And also, I feel not only for the actors, but I feel for everybody. I mean, there are so many people involved in running a theatre. It's just the people you don't see, the stage doorman, the man who does the lighting, the carpenters, everybody, and there's kind of no guarantee. And as David said, I don't know how, for instance, you would do a comedy if you had people kind of sparsely sitting, which indeed, again, we have to say, if we're going to obey the coronavirus lockdown, which we must, but I don't know how that would work, because I don't know what feedback you would get, nor do I know how the audience would enjoy a play if it was like that.
Well, actually, on that issue, Judy, there was a government paper published yesterday. It was this review into the 2-metre guidance and whether it could be reduced to 1 metre. And they have a table where they talk about theatres, and they suggest the idea of a screen between the cast and the audience. Could you work with that?
I expect so. Could have a play about a goldfish, couldn't you? No, I mean, that's a very trivial thing to say.
But David, that takes the fourth wall to new levels, doesn't it?
I also don't understand the logic of that. What is that protects the cast from the audience? But what about the audience from each other and the cast from each other? I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't think they're actually pursuing it. It's just one of the ideas that they looked at. David, I mean, you're not one of the impresarios. You're not a money man. You're an actor. But I mean, do you have any kind of figures in mind for financial help that the government could provide to the industry?
Well, like you say, I don't understand stuff like that. I don't know how much it needs, but I know that it needs enough so that when we do come out of this, the theatre can be the engine for economic growth that it is. The one statistic that I always find fascinating is that for every pound of public money invested in the arts, £5 is returned to the exchequer. So there's no charity in that. That just means that is an industry which will be part of the economic recovery if it can survive to reopen properly. And that's the bit we need help with right now. That's the bit that's looking a bit shaky. 70% of theatres say they won't make it past Christmas. They won't make it. 70% of theatres. That's, nearly 3/4 of the theatres in the country disappearing unless there's some kind of bridging mechanism put in place. That's massive. That would have cultural implications forever.
Dame Judy, I suppose just to you though, listening to that, some of our listeners and viewers might be thinking, well, come on, it's a nice to have, the theatre. Okay, we've been through a national crisis. Public money has to be spent on the things that people really, really need. But what does it make you think, or how would you defend it to people who say this is a nice to have? Oh, well, it's a bit sad if the lovers are disappointed, but there are more important things to get on with.
I mean, I think that as David says, we pay our dues to the economy, and also we're famous for our theatre and our theatre tradition here. And I think during lockdown, for instance, everybody has turned to seeing films and streaming of plays and things like that. It is something that I think I think you need. Not everybody, of course, goes to the theatre, but I think the majority of people would miss their local theatre, or being able to go to the theatre in London. I mean, when you hear that the Vic is in trouble, and the Nuffield in Southampton, and you just wonder, are they going to open again? Are they just going to go to the wall?
Now, we have our entertainment as political journalists has been watching the daily Downing Street briefing every day, which has just finished. Did you get to know any of the characters at the podium? Could you imagine playing any one of them yourself? I don't know.
Is this David?
David, I can see you
David,
maybe as starring David Tennant as Professor Chris Whitty.
Chris Whitty, yeah.
And Dame Judy, did you ever tune into the briefings? What did you think of it as a kind of a bit of theatre?
Not much.
Oh. What, because the script was boring or the performances were rubbish?
Both. I mean, I watched so much, and then I'm that very, very noisy theatre goer who got up and left the theatre, I'm afraid.
Who was the worst performer? Forgive me for asking you such a bold question.
You get to be the critics now.
How could I say that? How could I say that? How could I possibly say that?
I mean, drama works when it's plausible and feels like, relatable to our real life, doesn't it? And there were a few moments when it's very difficult to see the plausibility in driving 30 miles to test your eyesight, for example.
David, did you find yourself watching with a sort of actor's eye in terms of the body language, in terms of the language that was used in the exchanges between the people behind the lecterns?
Well, I think you do inevitably.
Sorry, David.
Go on, Judy.
I think that's quite good to use later. I think probably some of these performances we've seen probably will come out in certain things later. See, my head actually rather.
While you're getting ready to play Boris Johnson there by doing your hair in his style, Dame Judy, I've got to ask before you go, do either of you actually have any work booked in the near future, David?
I was in the middle of filming something. I was Phileas Fogg. We'd done an episode and a half, and we all. So I'm waiting to see if these hair extensions will ever be used again. Like every other industry, we await news on when we're allowed to start again.
And Dame Judy, what about you? Anything did you have in the diary?
I was about 2 days after the lockdown. I was going to do 2 weeks at the Bridge with Giles Brandreth, in conversation with Giles, because we did in conversation for the Richmond Theatre to raise money for the Richmond Theatre, and then we were asked by the Bridge if we'd go and do it there. So that's rather a convenient thing, because that doesn't require any rehearsal. It's just a conversation, and that perhaps could be done at some point if it ever happens again.
David, seeing as you were just raising the issue of eyesight tests, I was wondering if among small regional theatres, is there one in Barnard Castle?
Good question. I don't know.
I don't think there is.
I think there is. I've just looked it up.
Is there?
Oh. Yeah, I think there's one called the Witham or the Whittam. A little like the Home Secretary's parliamentary seat. Anyway, yeah, something for everyone in Barnard Castle. We offer theatre, music, art, dance, film, comedy.
Eyesight tests.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much, both of you. It's been lovely hearing you in our headphones, and and to everyone who works in the theatre industry, I hope you're okay. Does sound like there's going to be a 5-point plan, but maybe not necessarily loads and loads of money. Certainly not yet. But David and Judy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll be back with another episode very soon.
Bye-bye.
The Coronavirus Newscast from the BBC.
What happens when a man stands up and says, "Enough is enough"? The